If you want to absolutely destroy someone's argument, the worst thing you can possibly do is open your mouth.
Which sounds completely backwards, I know.
Right. But think about that for a second. Have you ever walked away from a massive confrontation and intellectually you know you nailed it? Like you had the facts, your logic was flawless, you delivered the perfect rebuttal.
Oh, absolutely.
But then as you're driving home, you realize you still have this tight knot in your throat. You feel exhausted, drained, and weirdly like you still lost.
It is a terrible sinking feeling because, every word you spoke in defense of yourself somehow pushed you further away from your own actual strength.
Yep.
I mean, we are just conditioned to equate silence with weakness or lack of courage. We treat it as an absence.
Yeah, but we are turning that completely upside down today. And our mission for you today is to fundamentally unlearn the deeply ingrained habit of constantly defending your thoughts, your truth, and, well, your ego. We are exploring how the philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche viewed silence not as submission, but as the ultimate destabilizing weapon of self-mastery. Okay, let's unpack this.
Right, so to really use silence as a tool, we have to first examine why we are so obsessed with talking in the first place. I mean, why do we feel this burning, almost physical need to rebut or to correct people to prove that we are right?
Because it really does feel physical, like a reflex.
Exactly. And a lot of this ties into a core concept of Nietzsche's philosophy called the will to power. And most people completely misunderstand this concept. They think that the will to power is about dominating the conversation, shouting the loudest, or forcing someone else to submit to your logic.
Well, society absolutely conditions us to operate on that false definition. From a really young age, we are taught that truth must be defended tooth and nail. If someone challenges your beliefs or your character, the biological imperative is to stand your ground and fight for it. It honestly feels like survival.
But Nietzsche looked at that reactive impulse and saw something entirely different. He didn't see a noble pursuit of truth. He saw a symptom of profound weakness.
Wait, weakness?
Yeah. He argued that when people are locked in heated arguments, they aren't looking for objective truth at all. They are desperately seeking power to reaffirm their own fragile egos. Argumentation isn't about sharing wisdom, it is defensive armor. It's just a cry from the ego to maintain control of the narrative.
Which means the moment you step into that arena, the moment you feel that hot, impulsive need to justify your position to someone who is, frankly, committed to misunderstanding, you've already lost the game.
You've accepted their terms of engagement.
Exactly. It makes me think of playing a totally rigged game of tug of war. You're standing there, your heels dug into the mud, and the other person is just yanking on the rope, trying to pull you into their emotional chaos.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
And your ego is screaming at you, pull harder, prove you're stronger, dig in. But the only way to actually end the game and to make the other person stumble and fall flat on their face is to just drop the rope.
What's fascinating here is how Nietzsche categorizes these two different states of mind. He believed that the reactive mind is inherently a subjugated mind.
Subjugated, meaning controlled by the other person.
Right. If you are reacting, you are being controlled by the stimulus. You are literally a puppet on their string. The mind that drops the rope and simply watches the other person fall backward, that observing mind is the one that is truly dangerous.
And this ties perfectly into what Nietzsche called herd morality. Because when you are trapped in herd morality, you live your life under the expectations of others. It's this desperate quest to be validated by the group as good or correct.
You actually need the approval of the person you're arguing with to feel secure in your own identity.
Right. Your strength is entirely dependent on them.
Which means it isn't your strength at all. It's rented power. So if dropping the rope and choosing silence makes logical sense, we have to look at what is actually happening on the other side of that dynamic. When you refuse to react, what is going on inside the opponent's mind.
This is where the psychological warfare of silence gets really intense, because we usually think of silence as an empty void. But in a confrontation, silence acts as a mirror.
Yes, a mirror.
When you offer no external resistance, you deprive them of a fight, which forces the speaker to hear their own voice. They suddenly have to confront the sheer emptiness of their own arguments. They are just swinging wildly at the air.
And from a psychological standpoint, the human brain simply cannot handle that sudden vacuum. In a confrontation, the brain perceives sudden, unbothered silence as judgment.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, the speaker loses control of the narrative and an internal panic sets in.
Because biologically, what we were talking about here is an amygdala hijack. The amygdala is the fear and anxiety center of the brain. When someone is aggressively arguing with you, They are fully expecting a fight or flight response. When you give them nothing, their brain registers an anomaly.
The amygdala flares up.
Right. They start projecting all their own insecurities onto your silence. They start thinking, are they judging me? Do they see right through me? Do they know I'm completely bluffing?
And that internal panic is particularly devastating to manipulators. People with highly manipulative or, narcissistic tendencies absolutely rely on your emotional reactions to maintain their control. They need you to get upset.
They feed on it.
They do. They need you to frantically defend yourself because it validates their dominance. When you don't react, you break their entire cycle. But this silence actually triggers their deepest unresolved pains, like traumas of rejection, of abandonment, of profound humiliation. It inflicts a massive narcissistic ego injury.
Okay, I have to push back on this a little bit because listening to that, it sounds incredibly severe. If our silence is actively triggering deep childhood traumas of abandonment and humiliation in the other person, aren't we just weaponizing psychology? I mean, is this still about personal self-defense and self-mastery, or is this crossing the line into being a bit cruel?
I get why you'd ask that, and it is a necessary distinction to make. But the way this philosophy frames it, this isn't about unprovoked cruelty. You aren't walking up to an innocent person and giving them the silent treatment just to torture them.
Right, that would be toxic.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You are dealing with someone who is actively trying to dominate, mock, or manipulate you. Your silence isn't a weapon forged to harm it. It is a mirror you are simply holding up. You aren't creating their trauma. You're just refusing to be the shock absorber for it anymore. It is highly uncomfortable for them, yes, but only because it demands they look at themselves instead of controlling you.
That makes a lot of sense, actually. You are just stepping out of the way of their own destructive momentum.
Exactly.
So we understand the psychological chaos this creates in the other person, but how do we practically harness this? Like, how do we become the person who can stand in that highly uncomfortable tension and not crack? Because it takes an immense amount of discipline.
It really does. And this brings us to a massive concept in Nietzsche's philosophy, the Übermensch, or the overman.
Right.
Applying the concept of the Übermensch specifically to communication changes everything. The Übermensch is a person who does not merely react to the world, they shape it. They have completely transcended the petty need to win debates or engage in cheap emotional games. For the Übermensch, silence isn't passive. It is an active threat. It is a solid wall of authority.
Here's where it gets really interesting.
It is the foundational step, and man, it goes against every instinct we have. The desire to justify yourself is described as an internal poison.
An internal poison.
Yeah. Every single time you give in to that desire to explain why you are right, you are showing that you still care what they think. You are proving that they hold power over you. True silence is born the moment you realize you owe absolutely nothing to anyone.
The biology of killing that need to respond is brutal too. When you are accused of something, your body just floods with adrenaline. Your chest gets tight, your heart rate spikes.
Your brain is screaming at you to clear your name.
Exactly. To use this weapon, you literally have to sit in that physiological discomfort and let the adrenaline metabolize. You have to let the poison leave your system without opening your mouth to relieve the pressure.
And once you successfully kill that urge to speak, you suddenly find yourself with a massive amount of freed up mental bandwidth because you aren't frantically drafting your next sentence while they are talking. That shifts you directly into the second weapon, which is observation. You stop listening to reply, and you start listening like a hunter tracking prey in a forest.
It totally reminds me of a master poker player. Imagine you're at a high-stakes table and you decide to fold your hand early. You go silent, but you don't get up and leave the table.
You stay right there.
Yeah, you just sit there perfectly still, intensely studying everyone else's tells while they exhaust all their chips fighting each other. You are looking at their micro-expressions. You are noticing how their breathing gets shallow or how the pitch of their voice gets slightly higher as they start to panic.
Wow, yeah.
You become the most dangerous person in the room simply because you are the only one paying absolute attention.
You are preserving your capital while they frantically spend theirs. And as you sit there observing them, you naturally begin to deploy the third weapon, time. You weaponize the pause.
The physical weight of a pause is incredible. I mean,
Yeah.
10 seconds of silence in a heated conversation feels like an absolute eternity.
Because tension is power. When they finish their grand, aggressive statement, they are entirely braced for your reaction. When you just let the seconds tick by, you create an internal collapse in them.
is crumble.
They do. Their mind rushes to fill that empty time with assumptions. They actually start negotiating against themselves. A simple, calm look held in silence for a few seconds too long has exponentially more impact than 10 perfectly formulated sentences.
And that stretching of time perfectly sets up the fourth weapon, unpredictability. By withholding the expected reaction, like when they yell and you don't flinch, or they mock you and you just steadily look at them, you completely invert the dynamics of the interaction.
You stop being the reactive target.
Exactly. You become the gravitational center of the whole conversation. They suddenly have to orbit around you, desperately trying to figure out what you were doing.
At that point, your silence is pure dominance. You haven't raised your voice once, you haven't defended a single point, but you are entirely in control of the room. You have reshaped the reality of the interaction.
But there is a massive trap here. We've all been in situations where we stayed quiet, and it definitely did not feel like pure dominance. It felt terrible. It felt like we were just being a doormat.
Oh, for sure.
And the framework draws a really harsh, bright line between the masterful silence of the Übermensch and a very different, much darker type of silence.
This raises an important question, maybe the most important one of this whole deep dive.
Yeah.
Because silence can be incredibly deceptive. Sometimes silence is actually a silent scream. It is the reaction of someone who has completely lost control of their life and is just enduring abuse.
Like swallowing your anger, conceding in a discussion just to keep the peace, avoiding conflict at all costs and convincing yourself that you're just being mature.
Yeah, Nietzsche has zero respect for that. He called it the morality of slaves. Slave morality is a system built by the weak to survive in a world dominated by the strong. It is an invisible code that teaches people to nullify themselves, to shrink, to conform.
That's heavy.
And the most insidious part is how the ego rationalizes this cowardice. The brain cannot handle the shame of submission, so it reframes that fear as virtue.
Oh, so people pat themselves on the back and say, well, I'm the bigger person, or I'm keeping the high ground, when really they were just too terrified to stand up for themselves.
Exactly. If you are using this false peace, you are just being shaped by the expectations of others. You are letting them build an empire on your silence. You are basically a participant in your own subjugation.
Let's expand on that silent scream metaphor, because the physical reality of it is so telling. In slave morality, your silence is usually accompanied by a tight jaw. You are looking at the floor. Your shoulders are hunched, trying to make yourself as small as possible. You are physically folding in on yourself, trying to disappear.
Contrast that with masterful silence. The Übermensch remains fully present. They keep steady, relaxed eye contact. Their shoulders are down, their breathing is slow and controlled. The cowardly silence is an absence. The masterful silence is an overwhelming, grounded presence.
So I have to ask this for the listener, because the philosophy is great, but real life happens fast.
Sure.
In the heat of the moment, say your boss is aggressively criticizing you in a meeting, or a friend is completely dominating the room and talking over you. How do you internally distinguish if you are employing masterful silence or if you are just falling victim to cowardly silence? How do you check yourself right then and there?
It comes down to a harsh internal audit of your own motives. You have to ask yourself, are you quiet because you are afraid of what will happen if you speak? Are you quiet because you feel a sense of guilt or a desperate, anxious need not to disturb the harmony of the room?
And if the answer is yes.
If fear, anxiety, or submission is driving the silence, you are operating in slave morality. Masterful silence feels entirely different. It feels grounded. It is a highly conscious choice. You are quiet because you have quickly evaluated the situation and decided that this person, in this moment, does not deserve your energy.
Wow. Your silence isn't an escape route to hide behind, it is a boundary you have erected.
Yes. You aren't shrinking away from the conflict. You are taking up space with your silence. You are claiming the territory.
You are holding the mirror steady.
Holding the mirror steady.
Okay.
Exactly.
So what does this all mean? We started by talking about the frustration of losing arguments, or the shame of feeling silenced by loud, arrogant people. But what Nietzsche is offering here is a total synthesis of how to communicate and how to exist in a chaotic world. It is about moving from a state of constant submission to a state of absolute presence.
It completely redefines what true power actually is. We mentioned the will to power at the very beginning of this deep dive. The ultimate realization of Nietzsche's will to power is not about conquering others. It is not about winning the debate or forcing the room to agree with you. It is entirely about dominating oneself. It is self-mastery.
The silence of the Übermensch is the stillness of a warrior who has already won the battle before it even begins, because they know they owe nothing to anyone. They have completely stepped off the battlefield of other people's fragile egos.
They refuse to play the rigged game of tug-of-war.
I want to challenge you, the listener, right now. I want you to mentally audit your own life over just the past week. Think about the interactions you've had at work, at the dinner table, or even scrolling online. How many times did you jump in to defend yourself when you honestly didn't need to? How many times did you remain silent out of pure fear or out of a desire not to rock the boat and felt that knot in your throat afterward? It is time to let your silence stop being an escape route. Stop using it to hide. Let it start being an invisible, unshakable boundary of absolute respect.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it leaves us with something incredibly profound to chew on. The framework promises immense individual power if you can master this Nietzschean ideal of silence. It makes you practically unmanipulable. But I want you to imagine what happens if everyone masters this. What if we all collectively drop our defensive armor? If we all choose the masterful, observant silence of the Übermensch, does society's communication break down into this cold, tense standoff of mutual observation where no one ever speaks? Or do we finally, for the first time in human history, reach a point where we only open our mouths and speak when we actually have something true to say?
That is a staggering thought. Imagine a world where all the noise, all the desperate justifications, and all those rigged tug-of-war games just stopped.
Yeah.
So the next time you find yourself holding that rope, feeling your ego scream at you to pull back and defend yourself, remember the greatest, most devastating move you can make is to simply let go, step back, and watch the illusion fall apart.